I pulled the unit up to the gates of the Great Falls estate, my battered white cargo van rattling against the expensive silence of the Virginia countryside. The valet took one look at the mud-splattered panels and actually recoiled, refusing to even touch the door handle. I didn't even get to unbuckle before my sister, Kelsey, intercepted me. She didn't offer a hug. She formed a blockade. Standing there in her silk dress, she turned to her billionaire in-laws and announced, loud enough for the staff to hear, "This is Isla. She smells like medical waste, so she'll be using the service entrance. We can't have her contaminating the aesthetic." Before we dive deeper into this mess, I have to ask, have you ever been made to feel small by the people who are supposed to lift you up? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly what that feels like. I want to hear your story. I walked down the narrow service path, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and pushed through the heavy steel doors of the catering kitchen. The atmosphere hit me instantly. A wall of humid heat, carrying the scent of roasting lamb and reduced balsamic. The staff moved in a synchronized blur of white coats and stainless steel, plating appetizers that cost more than the van I'd just parked in the shadows. I found a quiet corner near the swinging doors, poured myself a glass of tap water, and took up my post. Through the small circular window in the door, I had a perfect view of the main hall. It was a study in old-money elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto heavy oak tables. Men stood in bespoke suits that fit like second skins, and women wore diamonds that could fund a small revolution. My parents, Joshua and Susan, were in their element. I watched my father laugh too loudly at a joke that clearly wasn't funny, his desperation to belong leaking out of every pore. My mother was clutching her pearls, nodding vigorously at everything Trevor's mother said. Then I saw Kelsey. She was standing next to Trevor's mother, a woman who looked like she was carved out of ice, and she leaned in close. Her face wore a mask of performative concern, the kind of expression that usually precedes a dagger to the kidneys. The kitchen door swung open slightly, as a waiter passed through with a tray of scallops, and her voice drifted in, clear and sharp. "We try to be supportive," Kelsey was saying, her hand resting gently on the older woman's arm. "But it's hard. No one will hire her, you know. Not with her record. We basically support her out of pity. It's the only way she stays off the streets." A recovering addict with a criminal record. That was the lie. That was the story they had constructed to explain why their eldest daughter drove a rusted van, wore thrift store clothes, and disappeared for weeks at a time. It wasn't just an insult. It was a strategic dismantling of my character to elevate their own. The injustice of it burned in my chest, a hot, tight knot of anger. I wanted to kick open those doors. I wanted to scream that I held a top-secret clearance and 3 commendations for valor. I wanted to tell them that the medical waste in my van was actually high-tech surveillance gear, and that the record I had was sealed by the Department of Defense, not the county jail. But I didn't. I stayed silent. Why? Because silence is a weapon. In my line of work, being invisible is the only armor that matters. If they think I'm a failure, they don't look at me. If they think I'm an addict, they don't ask questions about where I go or why I carry a burner phone. The shame they pile on me isn't a burden, it's camouflage. Being the disappointment keeps me off the radar, and being off the radar keeps me alive. So I let them lie. I let them paint me as the broken bird, because a broken bird is the last thing a predator worries about. My phone buzzed against my hip. I pulled it out, expecting a spam notification or maybe a passive-aggressive text from my mother asking me to stay out of sight. Instead, the screen pulsed with a single, solid red bar. A tactical alert, code black. The world of canapés and rehearsal toasts vanished instantly. My heart rate slowed, my vision sharpened, and the ambient noise of the kitchen faded into white noise. Code black meant an immediate, lethal threat within a 2-mile radius. I tapped the screen, decoding the encrypted intel stream. A hit squad had just breached the perimeter of the neighboring estate. Their target was a foreign dignitary attending a private gala, and the threat was mobile, heavily armed, and moving fast. I looked around the catering kitchen, assessing the architecture with a new set of eyes. The neighboring estate was less than a mile through the woods. If the dignitary's security detail tried to evacuate by road, they would be ambushed at the choke point. They needed a hard point, a fortress. I looked at the thick stone walls of the wine cellar below us, originally built as a storm shelter. It was the only defensible structure in the entire area. I shifted gears. The sister was gone. The courier was gone. The operator was online. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't check with the event planner. I walked straight over to the head of the catering staff, a woman named Maria who looked like she was about to have a nervous breakdown over a missing tray of scallops. "Maria," I said, my voice low and authoritative. It wasn't a request, it was a command frequency. She looked up, startled by the sudden change in my demeanor. "I need you to clear the lower corridor, now. Move your staff to the upper pantry and lock the doors." "Who are you?" she asked, blinking rapidly. "The sister? I'm the person who is going to keep you safe," I said. "Do it." Something in my eyes must have convinced her because she didn't argue. She started barking orders in rapid-fire Spanish, moving her team with a speed that was impressive. I watched them mobilize these invisible workers, the people my family ignored and dismissed as background noise. I utilized them to prepare a secure perimeter. They moved heavy carts to block the rear access, locked service entrances, and cleared the sightlines down the hallway. It was elite leadership in a scullery. While my family was upstairs worrying about the font on the place cards and the humidity affecting their hair, I was turning their basement into a bunker. I checked my sidearm, hidden beneath my oversized gray blazer. I racked the slide one round in the chamber. Safety off. I moved to the main doors of the wine cellar and secured the heavy iron latch, ensuring the space was ready for the asset. Then I turned and headed for the stairs. I had to clear the kill zone, the glass-walled atrium, where my family was currently toasting their own magnificence, was a sniper's dream. It was a fishbowl of light, in a dark forest. If that hit squad missed their primary target and decided to take hostages, my family would be the first to fall. I pushed through the swinging doors and stepped into the main hall. The contrast was jarring. The jazz band was playing something soft and unobjectionable. The laughter was polite and brittle. I walked straight to the center of the room, my boots heavy on the marble floor, carrying the weight of a war they didn't even know was coming. "Everyone needs to move," I announced. I didn't shout, but my voice carried the weight of absolute command, cutting through the low hum of conversation like a serrated blade. "Now, away from the windows, into the hallway." The music stopped. The saxophonist lowered his instrument, looking confused. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that usually precedes a crash. Joshua, my father, turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen since I totaled his lawnmower at 16. He didn't just walk over to me. He marched, his heels striking the floor with the cadence of a man whose authority had just been challenged in front of his investors. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with a grip that was meant to hurt. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his voice shaking with a volatile mix of rage and humiliation. "Are you high? Is that it? Are you having an episode right now?" "Let go of me," I said calmly. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just looked at his hand on my sleeve, calculating exactly how much pressure it would take to hyperextend his wrist if he didn't release me in the next 2 seconds. "I will call the police," he threatened, squeezing tighter, his nails digging into the fabric of my thrift store jacket. "I will have you arrested, Isla. You are ruining this night. Look at you. You're a mess. You're hallucinating. I knew we shouldn't have let you in." Kelsey rushed over, her face twisted in a snarl that ruined her perfect contour. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the guests, frantically trying to perform damage control with her eyes. "You are ruining the visuals," she screamed, her voice pitching up into hysteria. "Get out. You are embarrassing us. Trevor's parents are watching." They thought I was crazy. They interpreted my tactical movements as a psychotic break, a drug-fueled meltdown that reinforced every lie they had ever told about me. They saw a daughter who was unstable, ungrateful, and broken. They were worried about spilled wine, about the flow of the evening, about the lighting for the photographer. I was counting the seconds until impact. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, not fear for his safety, but fear for his reputation. He would rather risk a bullet than a scene. 3 minutes, I said, looking at my watch. You have 3 minutes before this room becomes a problem. Move. No! Joshua shouted, spit flying from his lips. You move! Get out of my sight before I drag you out myself. He raised his hand, perhaps to point, perhaps to grab me again, but the motion was cut short. A dull boom echoed from the distance. It wasn't loud, not like in the movies. It was a low, concussive thud that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the crystal glasses on the tables. The ground shivered. What was that? Trevor asked, his voice trembling as he looked around nervously. That, I said, pulling my arm free from my father's grip, with a sharp, decisive jerk, was a breach charge. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising chorus of panic getting closer by the second. Then came the screech of tires on gravel, not the polite crunch of a luxury sedan arriving for dinner, but the hard, aggressive slide of armored vehicles braking at high speed. The doors to the rehearsal dinner didn't open, they burst inward. The dignitary's security detail didn't walk in. They crashed through the splintering wood like a human battering ram. It was a chaotic tangle of torn suits, bloodied faces, and desperate momentum. In the center of the scrum was a man in a tuxedo, his face gray with terror, the High Commissioner. They had been pushed off the road, hunted through the woods, and had run toward the only light they saw, my sector. Behind them, the night exploded. The large bay windows of the atrium, the ones I had just cleared, shattered inward as suppressing fire from the pursuing hit squad tagged the building. Glass rained down like diamond hail, shredding the floral arrangements and embedding into the drywall where my father had been standing just seconds ago. Panic didn't ripple through the room. It detonated. The screams were primal. People scrambled over each other, knocking over chairs, slipping on the polished marble. The air filled with the acrid stench of cordite and the sharp tang of fear. And then came the swarming. The main doors were kicked wide, and a second wave of men flooded the room. But these weren't the attackers. These were the response team, federal agents, in heavy tactical gear, FBI, HRT, and DSS. They moved with the terrifying, fluid speed of predators, weapons drawn, laser sights cutting through the dust and smoke. Federal agents, get down! Hands! Show me your hands! The command was a physical force. The billionaires, the socialites, the titans of industry, they didn't argue. They dropped. Trevor, the man who thought he owned the world because his family owned a bank, was curled in a fetal position under a buffet table, shielding his head with a serving platter. My father was pressed flat against the wainscoting, trembling so violently his teeth chattered. It is a strange and brutal truth that I have learned in my years in the shadows. Civilization is a very thin coat of paint. We spend our lives chasing soft power, money, influence, reputation, the right table at the right restaurant. My family had built their entire identity on this currency. They believed that because they were important in a boardroom, they were important in the world. But in this room, right now, the exchange rate for social status had dropped to zero. When the glass breaks and the shouting starts, your net worth doesn't matter. Your connections don't matter. The only currency that holds value is survival. The only authority is force. In this terrified huddle of elites, the billionaire was just a frightened animal waiting for permission to breathe. The failure daughter, the one they mocked for hauling waste, was the only person in the room who wasn't prey. I tapped my earpiece, cutting through the noise. Unit 1, engage aerial surveillance, I commanded, my voice flat and steady. Outside, in the dark driveway, the roof vent of my battered white van slid open. The tactical drone I kept charged for overwatch, deployed with a high-pitched whine, ascending rapidly to scan the perimeter. The feed flickered to life on my phone screen, thermal imaging painting the grounds in shades of blue and angry orange. I have eyes on, I said into the comms, stepping over a shattered vase. I walked toward the lead agent, a man whose face was masked by a ballistic helmet. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't flinch. 2 tangos moving south, retreating toward the tree line. Sector 4 is clear. The agent looked at me, a woman in an oversized, thrifted gray suit, standing amidst the wreckage of a $500,000 party. He saw the earpiece. He saw the stance. He saw the lack of fear. He didn't ask who I was. He nodded. Copy that. Sector 4 clear. I turned back to the room. The silence that followed the chaos was heavy, broken only by the whimpering of the guests. My family was huddled together near the kitchen door. Kelsey was staring at me, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, her mouth hanging open. She looked at the agents, then, at me, trying to reconcile the sister she ridiculed with the woman who was currently directing federal law enforcement. The narrative was breaking, the glass house had shattered, and they were finally seeing the world without the filter of their own ego. The High Commissioner entered the room not as a victim, but as a statesman. He brushed the drywall dust from his tuxedo jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and stepped over the wreckage of the floral archway. He was a man whose face had graced the covers of Time and The Economist, a figure of immense geopolitical weight, now standing in a dining hall that smelled of fear and spent ammunition. He didn't look at the shattered windows. He didn't look at the federal agents securing the perimeter. His eyes swept the room, dismissive of the billionaires cowering in the corners, until they landed on me. He started walking. Joshua, my father, saw him coming. Instinctively, his posture straightened. He smoothed his tie, a reflex born of a lifetime of social climbing. He took a half step forward, assuming that as the host, as the man of the house, he was the person the dignitary would address. Kelsey stood up, wiping her face, preparing to be charming even in the midst of disaster. The High Commissioner didn't even blink at them. He walked right past my father, as if he were a piece of furniture. He bypassed Trevor, who was still clutching a silver serving tray like a shield. He walked straight to me. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at my oversized, thrifted suit, the one Kelsey had mocked as unfeminine. He looked at the earpiece. He looked at the steady hands that had just coordinated a kill box. Sentinel, he said. The code name hung in the air, heavier than the chandelier above us. I did not expect to see you in Virginia, he continued, his voice rich with a European accent and profound relief. I was told you were on rotation in the East. I live here, sir, I said, keeping my tone professional. I was attending a family function. He glanced around the room, taking in the terrified socialites, and then looked back at me with a knowing glint in his eye. Then I am the luckiest man on the eastern seaboard. That extraction in Budapest was impressive, Agent, but this was surgical. He gestured toward the driveway, where my battered white van was idling. Your unit, outside the surveillance feed, the drone deployment, it gave my detail the 3 seconds we needed to clear the ambush zone. Without that medical waste vehicle of yours, I would be dead. He took my hand, my rough, unmanicured hand, and shook it firmly, holding it for a second longer than protocol dictated. You saved us all. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a reality shattering. I watched my family. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. Joshua was pale, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his brain trying to compute that the failure daughter was being hailed as a savior by a world leader. Kelsey was staring at me, her eyes wide and glassy, stripping away the layers of her own denial. The narrative they had built, the addict, the loser, the charity case, was disintegrating into dust right in front of their eyes. They realized, all at once, that while they were playing house, I was holding the walls up. The lead federal agent stepped forward. Ma'am, we have a secure transport arriving for the asset. We're clearing the site. I nodded. Go. Sector is cold. The dignitary turned to leave. He paused near the door, looking back at my father, who was still trembling against the wall. You have a remarkable daughter, mister. He paused, not knowing, or perhaps not caring, about my father's name. The agency is lucky to have her. I hope you know what she is worth. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out into the night, flanked by his detail. The room was left with the smell of gunpowder and the wreckage of a perfect rehearsal dinner. The silence stretched, thin and tight, until it snapped. Joshua stood up slowly, his legs shaky. He looked at the shattered glass, then at me. He tried to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. Well, he stammered, smoothing his hair, his eyes darting around the room to see who was watching. I guess we knew all along she was capable of something, right? Just a misunderstanding. A little family secret. Kelsey stood up, wiping her face, her survival instinct kicking in. She looked at Trevor's mother, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. We We were just protecting her cover, Kelsey lied, her voice shaking but gaining strength. That's why we said those things. About the waste. About the record. It was all part of the plan. We had to keep her safe. I looked at them. The audacity was breathtaking. They were pivoting. They were trying to rewrite history in real time. Trying to co-opt my victory, to save their own egos. They wanted to be the heroes of my story now that they knew it was a success. No, I said. The word cut through their lies like a knife. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my oversized blazer. I didn't unlock it to call a cab or check a notification. I unlocked it to kill a narrative. I navigated to my banking app, my thumb hovering over the biometric login. The screen refreshed, and the balance updated in real time. A deposit had hit the account 12 minutes ago, my hazard pay for the Budapest extraction plus the immediate tactical bonus for tonight's intervention, $35,000. I walked over to Trevor, the billionaire who had spent the evening looking at me like I was a stain on his carpet. I held the screen up to his face, letting the blue light illuminate his terror. I don't need your charity, Trevor, I said, my voice cold and steady, devoid of the shame they had tried to feed me for a decade. And I never had a record. That was a story Kelsey invented because she couldn't handle having a sister who outranked her. Ask your fiancé where the money you gave me actually went, because I never saw a dime. Trevor turned to Kelsey. The look on his face wasn't love anymore, it was calculation. He was looking at a liability. I turned to my mother. Susan was clutching her pearls, her eyes darting around the room, still trying to figure out how to spin this to her bridge club. And Mom? I said. The next time you want to talk about medical waste and contamination, remember who just took out the trash. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the front door, my boots crunching on the glass that littered the entryway. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of pine and ozone, instead of fear and perfume. My van, the unit, was idling where I left it, the tactical drone having already returned to its docking bay on the roof. Isla. The voice was desperate, shrill. It was Susan. She was running down the stone steps after me, tripping slightly in her heels. Isla, wait, please, stay. She grabbed the handle of my van door just as I reached for it. We have cake. We can fix this. We can explain everything to the guests. Just come back inside. I looked at her hand on the metal, the same hand that had waved me away hours ago. Fix what, Mom? I asked. The windows? The reputation? Or the 20 years you spent treating me like a disease you were ashamed to catch? We're family, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, tears not for me, but for herself. You can't just leave. We need you. I already left, I said. I left years ago. You just didn't notice, because I was still standing in the room. I pulled the door open, forcing her to let go. I climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was worn and comfortable. The engine purred. A heavy, reliable sound that promised miles of distance. I looked at the mansion one last time. It was a beautiful house, lit up against the dark sky, filled with ugly truths and broken glass. I put the van in gear and drove away. As the iron gates closed in my rearview mirror, sealing them inside their gilded cage, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in a decade. You know, people always say you should never burn bridges. They tell you that family is forever, that forgiveness is divine, but I disagree. True justice isn't about revenge. It isn't about burning their house down or screaming until you lose your voice. True justice is the act of the sower. Sometimes, you have to look at the soil you were planted in and realize it is poisoned. You can't fix the soil. You can't water a dead tree and expect fruit. The only way to survive is to uproot yourself, to take your seeds, your talent, your love, and your protection, and go plant your garden somewhere else. I am done watering dead plants. I am done trying to bloom in the dark. I am going to plant my own garden now, far away from their toxicity, where the sun actually shines. I drove into the night, the road ahead clear and open. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic branch to save the tree? If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs the courage to walk away. And hit that subscribe button, because the best revenge is living well.